So, keeping with the fact that I have maintained in this module that your sexuality is something valuable and precious, and not to be treated in a careless fashion, this particular presentation is dealing with 3Ds, the design of your bodies, and the nature of the diseases that are out there, and how to defend yourself. This is not going to be the sort of thing you would encounter in high school. This is a little different. So again, our archery motif and the idea of hitting the bullseye, aiming for the mark and hitting the mark of the good and the right and the ought when we're doing ethics or doing moral philosophy. And so this 3Ds presentation is design, disease, defense, the first of which is the design of our bodies. You won't hear or read much about this because for some reason the media doesn't give this issue much coverage. But the fact is, as a human being, whether you're male or female, you have some significant sexual vulnerabilities. You guys read about this in the paper for this module that you had to do for your learning log. And here's the truth. You have vulnerabilities of design and potential vulnerabilities of experience and personality. The vulnerabilities of design have to do with females, and potential vulnerabilities of experience and personality especially have to do with males, and to a lesser degree with females. What do I mean by that? Well, we know that males are vulnerable in the sense that they get involved with sexual relationships without thinking in terms of long-term consequences. And so men oftentimes are not ready for the complications that can come out of sexual relationships, whether it be pregnancy or STDs or that person bonding to you or you bonding to them. Men haven't tended to think those things through. So when we deal with the weaknesses of males vis-a-vis their sexuality, all of the evidence points to they have weaknesses that are psychological and developmental as far as being mentally ready for intimacy and its outworkings. But for women, it's a different deal. It has to do with the actual design of the body. When I use the term design, I'm not using that in a religious sense. Michael Roos, a pretty famous atheist scientist, says that we cannot do the life sciences without the concept of design. It's just impossible to do. Because, for instance, the heart works like a pump, the eyes work like scopes, and so on. And so we have to talk about what these organs seem to be designed to do. So both men and women get STDs, but one of the sexes, due to design, is often at 100% greater risk than the other one of contracting a disease, and that's the female. So this is an old chart. I haven't seen one as good, so I've kept this one even across the years. It's from 1991. But the left-hand side of the chart is females, and the right-hand side of the chart is males. Look at as we go across. So this is the Medical Aspects of Human Sexuality journal. I got this in Eastern Maine Medical Center, or now it's called Northern Light. You can see that chlamydia, which is the most common STD of all, in one act of unprotected sex, 40% of women will get chlamydia and only 20% of men. Why? Well, we're going to look at that. Gonorrhea. 50% of women will get gonorrhea, only 25% of men. Interestingly, when we're talking about HPV, the source of genital warts, it's equal. 10 and 10 are the percentages for males and females. The same thing with genital herpes, 30% and 30%. You see with hepatitis, it's the thing we saw before. The women are at twice the risk. Syphilis, for some reason that we don't know, the men are not just at half the risk of women. So it's 30% of women will get syphilis and 20% of men from one unprotected act of sex. Then again, chancroid, it's 30% for women and 15% for men. And it's 1% on HIV for women and 0.9% for men on HIV. And like with syphilis, we're not sure why that is. Let's just go back to genital warts and genital herpes. The reason why those numbers are the same is because in those two instances, in order to get them, you do not have to have an exchange of bodily fluids. They don't come necessarily from an exchange of bodily fluids alone. For HPV and for herpes, all you have to have is skin-to-skin contact. So, for instance, petting alone can give you herpes or genital warts. It has been said that if you wanted to have a condom that would protect you from those two diseases, those two viruses, it would have to look like a frogman's wetsuit. It would have to cover your whole body. That's an FYI. So for your information, that you'd be aware of that. So why is it that women, with most of the time, are at double the risk of men? Well, if you think about the design of our bodies, a man gets rid of something and a woman keeps it. And here's where she keeps it. So at the bottom of the picture, the long opening is the vaginal opening. And as you see where it narrows there, that's where the cervix is. And then as we go up above into where it widens out and there's kind of a triangular opening, like a triangle turned upside down, that's the uterus. As we branch out, the two stems that come down on either side, and you see a number of little things on the end that are kind of circular or oval shaped, those are the ovaries. They contain oocytes, and those oocytes are going to ripen and become ovums, and they'll come down into the uterus. And the way that they make their way to the uterus is through those little things that you see on the end of the fallopian tubes. Those are fibrae. They look sort of like sea anemones. And so the fibrae take and they bring the ovum into the fallopian tube, and then the ovum travels down through those tubes. Those tubes are almost translucent, and so the ovum has to make its way through those tubes. So a man gets rid of semen in an act of sex, and a woman takes it into her body. And so if you think about it, this part of the body is warm, dark, and moist. If you ask an epidemiologist or anybody who does research with bacteria, where would be the best environment in order to grow pathogens and bacteria, they would tell you in some places it's warm, dark, and moist. And then when we put on top of that, not only is it warm, dark, and moist, but also it's a very highly vascular area. The reason why cocaine addicts snorts their cocaine up their nose is because the blood vessels are close to the surface and it gets right into the blood supply. So also here, this is very vascular. The blood supply is very close to the surface, just beneath the epithelial cells of the vaginal opening and of the uterus. So what happens is that when we have, for instance, somebody gets chlamydia. Chlamydia is asymptomatic. You don't know you have chlamydia. And it's very easy to treat. It's very easily cured, but if you don't know that you have it, you don't know that you need to have it treated. And so when men, it's not asymptomatic in, it's females that it's asymptomatic in, no symptoms. And so it's when it becomes pelvic inflammatory disease that then a woman knows that she has it. The problem is, of course, is that pelvic inflammatory disease destroys the fallopian tubes and scars them very badly. The fibrae can be completely gone if there's been a bad case of pelvic inflammatory disease. And statistically, if a woman gets pelvic inflammatory disease one time, her chances of ever having a child, ever conceiving a child, have been literally cut in half. She now has a 50% chance of having a child. So this is the reality, that a woman is at double the chance or the risk of contracting an STD that a man is by the design of her body. Now ask yourself, this is a little critical thinking, although that's the defense part, we're not at that D yet, but ask yourself, if somebody really cares about me, will they pressure me to put my hopes and dreams for the future, my hope of perhaps someday being a mom, will they pressure me to put these things at risk? So this is a significant reason for, if you feel uncomfortable with somebody and you think that they don't really care about you long term, they're just in the heat of passion in the moment, it's a significant reason for being able to say no. It's an excuse to say no. No, I'm at 100% greater risk of contracting an STD than you are. So that's a scary thing. And he could have an STD and not even know that he has it. A lot of men have HPV and don't even realize they're carrying it. For a woman, genital warts or HPV can cause a lot of problems. And yes, we do have the vaccine against it, but it is not, first of all, it doesn't keep on working. It has to be re-given. And secondly, it's not as successful as some other vaccines. And so I know the name of it. I can't retrieve the name of the vaccine right now. So I want to ask you, if we use our bodies to do things they're not intended to do, what will the consequences be? For instance, if I use my lungs as filters for smoke, my brain as a chemistry set with the drugs I take, my liver as a distillery, I may get lung cancer, I may get brain damage, including frontal lobe damage, I may have cirrhosis of the liver based on how I treat my body with what I ingest and take into my body. So this is a question for you to think about. Is the design of your body a good clue about how best to use your body? And if so, shouldn't you be aware of this design and its vulnerabilities? Shouldn't the design of your genital tract offer a clue about what is in your best interest sexually? When you look at the animal kingdom, you see animals that are built for multiple partners and for promiscuity. For instance, cats. A cat can have kittens from up to 6 partners. She's wildly promiscuous, and has sex with all these different partners, and she can literally have 6 half-brothers and sisters of kittens who are born to one another, none of which share the same father. They're built for promiscuity. And there's other animals who are built for monogamy. Creatures like wolves and geese and like certain whales and dolphins. Which type of animal do you think the human genital tract is built like? The promiscuous animal or the monogamous? If it's like the promiscuous animal, it's a tougher genital tract because it's meant to be able to deal with all the pathogens from multiple partners. But if it's like a monogamous creature, then it's built like one that doesn't have as much risk and therefore doesn't have the protection. And the fact is, if you do your research in terms of human genitalia, looking at the human genital tract, we're built like a monogamous creature. That's the kind of genital tract you have. You're not built for having lots and lots of sexual partners. The heart is not a hotel. We know that in terms of attachment theory. It's not built for having lots of partners, but your body isn't either. So there are times in your life when waiting is the best thing to do, even if you're impatient and you really want something. And this is one of those times. It's a time for caution when we are in these years in our life. The truth is after premature intimacy, when things go immediately into the bedroom, it's not uncommon to discover that your partner is not as committed to or even interested in the idea of relationship as you are. Oftentimes it's that they just wanted to have sex. And it's hard for us not to have feelings after we have sex, even though we're dealing with the hookup culture. This is Laura Sessions' Step. You're going to have an opportunity for a discussion that comes from an NPR interview that she gave. This is her book, Unhooked, How Young Women Pursue Sex, Delay Love, and Lose it Both. And Step is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, and she has an ongoing column. She says, this culture of sexual aggression often leaves young women physically and emotionally unsatisfied. It leads them to gamble with their health. And by never taking the time to get to know and care about one man, young women may be rendering themselves incapable of forging stable, loving relationships. That's just a reality that we know, especially from attachment theory. And so her point is not to cluck her tongue. This is an NPR interview that she's giving, and this is a secular writer. So National Public Radio is not known for its conservative stances, but she's saying this hookup culture is not in a young woman's best interest, and especially in terms of the design of the body and its vulnerability to diseases, it's especially not. This is that, I'm just showing you the page for where we'll have that discussion available in this module from NPR. Okay, so disease itself, and I get from students oftentimes, we don't want to hear about disease because we heard about it in high school. Well, there's some things you ought to know. This is again an area of personal research for me. Certain STDs are permanent. By way of analogy, it's not an STD. I had chickenpox when I was a child. That's called herpes zoster. I'm now a man in my 60s, and my doctor wants me to get inoculations against shingles. Why does she want me to get inoculations against shingles? Because herpes zoster is a virus, and so it's still present in my system. From way back when I was 7 years old, now that I'm 63, there's still the potential for that virus to recur and for it to have an eruption of symptoms here and now. And so also with any kind of an STD that's viral. So if we're talking about HIV, or if we're talking about herpes, or we're talking about HPV, human papillomavirus, or we're talking about hepatitis B and other viral STDs, once you've got them, they're in your system for the rest of your life. You need to be aware of that. So currently, approximately 1 out of 4 sexually active teens in Maine has an STD, and 80% of them don't even know it yet. That's kind of an important thing for you to be aware of because of this, the fact that they can be asymptomatic. And they're quite shocked when they discover that they've got something that may have done damage to them internally. So because of the power of our sexuality, we need to be wise and give serious thought to how we use it. It sure is a source of great pleasure. But it's also something that we hope, most of us hope, to have the pleasure of family and long-term relationship from. And so we don't want to see damage done to it prematurely. When a decision to act can affect the rest of your life, wisdom is needed. You need to give some thought to how you would use your sexual capacities and capabilities. So what's the big worry about my level of sexual activity? while I'm in my teens. Well, I'm not trying to be an alarmist, but this is corny and purposely so. It really is a jungle out there. What do I mean by that? Well, this is a graphic from the Centers for Disease Control. I don't know, I think you can see and read that these are all different diseases, all different STDs. You can see shigellosis and gonorrhea and chlamydia and herpes and scabies. Scabies can be gotten either sexually or non-sexually. Trichomoniasis, amoebiasis, hepatitis B especially is sexually gotten. Shigella. There's all these diseases listed. And the number one word that's used by the CDC and by Planned Parenthood, especially, and also the Alan Guttmacher Institute, which was formerly the research arm of Planned Parenthood, the number one term that's used to describe the teen situation, the young adolescent situation, the people in their early 20s and in their adolescent years, is that STDs are epidemic in that part of our population. So this is a CDC brochure, Teens and STDs, a silent epidemic. Am I being, Chicken Little, the sky is falling when I say that it's epidemic? Really, I'm not. This is from the Centers for Disease Control. It's from their morbidity and mortality reports. STDs are a hidden epidemic of enormous health and economic consequence in the United States. This is from 2016 that statement comes. These are two researchers in the field of obstetrics and gynecology, Genius and Genius, husband and wife researchers. They say while infected individuals may experience increased feelings of anger, depression, isolation, rejection, and guilt, research also indicates that STDs may have a long-term negative effect on sexual enjoyment, and that infected patients may experience the following: partial or complete cessation of sexual activity, a total or partial loss of interest in sex, a more inhibited and less spontaneous sex life, or anxiety related to sexual desirability. Oftentimes there's chronic vaginal pain that comes about as a result of some of these STDs, and so that may explain some of what they're speaking about there. There's also that some of these disfigure us. Chancroid, for instance, imagine somebody taking a paring knife and cutting a conical hole or declivity in your pubic mound, if you're a female, or right around your testes, if you're a male, and imagine how you would feel about the appearance of your genitalia if you've got this big place where necrosis, where death of tissue has taken place right in your genitalia. It would make you feel pretty uncomfortable about yourself. This is why partial or complete cessation of sexual activity, a total or partial loss of interest in sex, a more inhibited and less spontaneous sex life, or anxiety related to sexual desirability. STDs have these effects on people. Now, this is from the Family Planning Perspectives, which is a magazine that is put out by Planned Parenthood. And this is just a quote, an excerpt. Moreover, the number of sexual partners demonstrated a clear dose effect. As the number of sexual partners increased, so did the probability of reporting a bacterial STD. Quite simply, the more sexual partners you have, the more STDs you will have, potentially. This is called the butterfly effect. This is not a terrible movie with Ashton Kutcher. Maybe you don't think it's a terrible movie. This is actually the epidemiological butterfly effect. So the saying is when you have sex with someone, you're having sex with everyone they had sex with and everyone they had sex with, and so on. Imagine you're a male or a female and you've not had sex with anyone else, and now you have sex with somebody who's been sexually active. The potential is there for your first act of intercourse to be exposure to all those partners that person was with. This is a chart that comes from the U.S. Surgeon General in the past. It's a sexual exposure chart. Let's just jump down to the number 5. See the number 5, number of sexual partners. And up at the top, under sexual exposure chart, if every person has only the same number of partners as you. So if you have 5 sexual partners and each of them has had 5 sexual partners, the number of people you've been exposed to is 31 people as far as your exposure for potential STD infection. Look how it exponentially explodes as we go down the list. If it's 8 and those 8 had 8 partners, you've been exposed to 255 people in their sexual activities. as far as infection. I don't know if you can see the writing down here in the lower left-hand corner. This is C. Everett Koop, who's a former U.S. Surgeon General. He says, when you have sex with someone, you're having sex with everyone that they have had sex with for the last 10 years and everyone they and their partners have had sex with for the last 10 years. And then over on the right-hand side from the Alan Guttmacher Institute, many teenagers as well as adults are indirectly exposed to more than one sexual partner each year because their partner has had sex with someone else. And so we need to know that we're dealing with somebody who we can trust their word. So ultimately, in our sexual relationships, I think we want health and well-being, really thriving, flourishing. Think of the term eudaimonia. We're dealing with virtue ethics. So we want to have that this part of our life would be a part of our life where we're healthy and well and we're enjoying the pleasures it can afford to us. Your sexual behaviors have the potential to either work for or against your health and your well-being. They can be either a wellspring of joy and happiness, which helps you as a human being to flourish and to thrive, or sadly, they can snatch away your dreams and hopes, leave you with illnesses, scars, sterility, and even a sense of worthlessness. And it needs to be said, I'm not being an alarmist, there's a very high mortality rate for babies conceived during adolescence, and that's because of the high STD infection rate in adolescence. So I've had to, as clergy, officiate at funerals for infants who were conceived in adolescent years who have died due to the STDs that the parents were dealing with. That's a fact. I have one young lady who I know and who are their family friends who 3 times I've had to do funerals for her children, for her babies that died before they were born. And I know from the family sharing with me that it's due to STD. So defense, how do we defend? Well, I think that the issue is that there's a lack of critical thinking. We really don't think about sex, especially in the heat of the moment. People don't think it through. So why on earth is Nelly Furtado up here? Well, this is her song, Promiscuous, that features the group Timbaland. And Nelly Furtado, to tell the truth, was kind of an unknown until she came out with this song, Promiscuous. I've been driving down the road in my car and heard like a 10-year-old calling in on the radio and asking to have Promiscuous played. Promiscuous boy, promiscuous girl. And they don't get what that's about. We don't understand about sex. We don't think about what that really is. Do you know what promiscuous means? Here's some definition for you. So it's, pick your dictionary. It's having sexual relationships with a number of partners on an informal or casual basis without discrimination. Or it's indiscriminate mixture or mingling of persons in sexual intercourse. Or it's having sexual relationships with many indiscriminately. Notice the recurrence of the word indiscriminate. It means having sex with whoever. And this is not a way to deal with your sexuality, just playing sexual roulette. It's putting yourself at crazy exposure for pain and for infection. And we need to think about what we're listening to. I have people I care about who say they like the song In the Club. What is Fitty singing about here? He says, I'm into having sex, I ain't into making love, so come give me a hug if you're into getting rubbed. I mean, this is not about I care about you. This is I want to use your body for my pleasure, is what it is. As over against him and what he says, Arthur Ashe, who was the first African-American to ever be on the U.S. Olympic tennis team, in his book Days of Grace, which he wrote when he was dying from HIV that he contracted due to having hemophilia and having gotten bad blood, was before our blood supply was safe. He said, I absolutely believe in the need to refrain from promiscuity. It is not freedom, but one of the fantasies of freedom. Both men and women should recognize that promiscuity is, as often as not, a condition of violence against our own best interests. I want you to listen. I know this is a video, and you've been listening to it for a while, but I want you to listen to the words of Simone Weil. Simone Weil, a pretty famous French philosopher who died during the Second World War when she was only in her early 40s. Simone Weil said, nothing is so beautiful, nothing is so continually fresh and surprising, so full of sweet and perpetual ecstasy as the good, and no desert is so dreary, monotonous, and boring as the evil. But with fantasy, it's the other way around. Fictional good, like fidelity, loyalty, staying with one partner. Fictional good is boring and flat, while fictional evil is varied, intriguing, attractive, and full of charm. So the thing is when we're dealing with fantasy, reality doesn't really get rightly represented. Think about, sex in movies and in TV. How much of the sex in movies and in TV do you see between committed partners who are long-term lovers of one another? Not much, right? People hop in the sack, and the music plays beautifully, and there's nobody gets any STDs. Most of the time, nobody gets pregnant. And so he's saying that we need to realize promiscuity, whether you're a guy or a gal, it's against your own best self-interest. And so true or false here, sex equals love. We hear a lot of people speak this way, sex is love, love is sex. But is it really? I mean, what are we really after, ultimately, with intimacy? I think most of us ultimately hope to have some sort of long-term relationship with family and with love between us and our partner. If we're going to have that, if you've grown up in an environment where there hasn't been that, where there hasn't been faithfulness, I brought up the power of modeling when we're dealing with virtue ethics. You need to find yourself somebody who is, or some couple, who've been long-term faithful to one another, somebody who's long-term loved another person and have them in your life. Elsewise, it's going to be awfully hard for you to break the influence and the modeling that's taken place, the habituation in unfaithfulness that you've been exposed to. So your sexual choices are potentially a source of relationship, of pleasure, of love, of family, of children, of tenderness, of loving affection, of your sense of identity, especially vis-a-vis attachment theory, and of security and shelter. Your sexuality is a force for great good and great pleasure and happiness over the course of your lifetime. Romance, companionship, love-making, children, and a sense of home are just some of the things that can flow from it. It literally has the ability to last a lifetime and to give more and more joy as the years increase. But it must be used wisely. Your sexuality has to be used wisely. You need to be skeptical about things that you see, by the way, online. A lot of times there's fantasies portrayed with regard to sexuality that are not true. And so you need to have realism about what's real as far as sexual intimacy and relating to somebody long term. So this idea, I think I've brought up already in this class, comes from Aristotle. The idea of that in that little acorn in the foreground is that beautiful oak in the background. That you have built into you the potential for something beautiful to come forward. That's called your entelechy, if you were to be your best self. But there are things that could militate sexually against your entelechy, against you realizing your potential. So you need to ask yourself, what is my entelechy? What's my potential? Who could I be? Where am I headed? What might I be if I take care of my own sexual potential and protect it and don't treat it carelessly? What dreams do I have that I might never realize if I make the wrong sexual choices for my own entelechy? And what must I do in order to protect those dreams? I'm going to leave you with that so that you can ponder on those things.